welcome back to another video. So today's video is going to be the monthly book roundup, which is where I talk about all of the books that I've read in the past month and what I thought about them. So this is going to be about August, and just so you know, this video is going to be a little bit long because in August I participated in a month-long readathon, which was themed around Harry Potter and the exams that they sit in the Harry Potter world. And so it was called N.E.W.T Readathon. I will leave links down below if you want to get information to be able to participate next year. That's why this video is extra long this month. So let's get into it as fast as we possibly can. The first book that I would like to talk about is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, which is about a boy, I guess, who is an orphan, and he finds a job at the library in this town. It's fancy and involves a lot of magic and like gods and things like that. So we follow his journey through of self-discovery, I guess, and yes, then adventures come into place and we find out that he is a lot more special than we thought he was. I listened to it on audiobook and it was so good. It was pretty long, but really good, and I'm really happy that I read it. Yeah, definitely recommend. The next book that I read was called Menina, and this is a Portuguese book and it's very famous here. I didn't explain this at the beginning, but for the readathon, there were requirements that you have to fill, so you couldn't just read any book that you liked. It had to be within those parameters. So this one was one of the ones that I read that fit those parameters, and I read it because it was quite small and it was something that I had never actually read from one end to the other. It was a sweet book. Every child of my generation here has read it or at least heard of it, so it was just a sweet sort of little short and sweet book, which is really cute. After that, I read The Man in the High Castle. I've seen a few of the episodes of the series and I really liked it, and I really liked the concept around it. So I was excited to read the book. The book, though, I didn't really like it that much. It wasn't super compelling. The characters weren't very relatable or likable, or I didn't feel invested in the characters or the story. And although I read it to the end because I wanted to know what happened and I wanted to know sort of inside, the whole concept of it, which is basically where the Nazis have won the war and they have split the world basically between themselves and the Japanese. So the United States is sort of split down the middle. That's such an interesting concept, and I feel like the writer could have done so much more with it if they had worked more on the characters and their personal stories. I didn't really care what happened to them, and I didn't really care about it, and then at the end it ended in a really weird way and I just didn't love it. So yeah, not a fan of that. Then I read Between the Assassinations, which is a book that sort of goes over 7 days in the life of this fictitious Indian town. So you have an array of characters, so for every sort of morning, afternoon, or in evening, you have a different story of a different character. So it's if you imagine short stories about these people, but they're all living in the same town and they all, maybe some of them even know each other and interact with each other. And it's very interesting. I really liked it. It was funny. The stories were good and really engaging, and I felt very invested in the characters, even though their stories were quite short. And I was actually a little bit disappointed that we didn't see more of an interconnection between their stories, but I still really enjoyed the book. Another one that I read especially for the readathon that I probably wouldn't have read otherwise was called Menino que não gostava de ler, and that means The Boy Who Didn't Like to Read. This was one of my favorite books as a child because it's about a boy who didn't like reading, and then they find out that his only problem with books is that he needs glasses. And he tries to run away from home and stuff, and it's very cute and it's sweet. And because I always loved reading, I always thought this book was so interesting to me, and I thought if only all the people in the world had glasses, then they probably would also enjoy to read. I don't know. Another book that I read in this sort of theme was The English Roses by Madonna. And that book, I got it as a gift when I was a child as well, and I read it then. And I used to really like it, and now when I've read it as an adult, it's just, a group of girls who treat this other girl really badly because she's so pretty and she's so, they're super jealous of her, and then they find out that she actually has a really tough life, and so they become friends with her. And it's just so ugh. So typical, so every other story ever, so I didn't really like that. Next up, I read Quidditch Through the Ages, which is one of the Hogwarts library books that J.K. Rowling came out with to supplement the Harry Potter world. And I thought it was so cute and it's such a good book. It's very small, so it's about 160 pages or something of that sort. It's just cute. If you're a Harry Potter fan, I think it's definitely worth reading these books, these like extra ones, because they really just add more content into something that we already love. So I thought that was really great. The illustrations were really great too, and there's a lot of like nice touches, so I enjoyed that. I also read Tales of Beedle the Bard again, which if you've watched these videos, I've already read it a few months ago. But I reread it for the Readathon and I loved it so much because I bought another edition of it because my first edition was a collector's and this one's also a collector's edition. But anyway, I got a different edition and it had more illustrations and things, so I really liked reading through that, and again, adds more content into a story that I really love, so I really enjoyed that. Next up, I read another book called Shadowmancer. This was a fancy book. It's about 2 or 3 people who are trying to stop somebody else from finding this sort of really powerful thing that can make him control spirits and, you know, all of this magic that makes him really powerful and that can really change the world. And he doesn't know that it actually is a lot more dangerous than he thinks it is. And the kids, there's a boy and a girl and an older boy who are trying to fight him and stuff. And although I really liked the story and I thought it was engaging and I thought it was fun to read, I didn't really like the fact that it was kind of from a religious point of view. I researched the book online after reading it and I found that this writer actually, but he basically thinks that a lot of these fantasy books and a lot of books are making kids not religious. I think something like that. So he really incorporates God into the book and like a lot of religious aspects. But I didn't really like it because if you're writing a fantasy novel which is about magic and the underworld and stuff, I guess I understand where he tried to fit in God because that's what he believes in. He wants to like pass on that message. But maybe fantasy and magic is not the best way to do it because it doesn't really go with each other, in my opinion. I enjoyed reading it. It's not a series that I want to continue with. Okay, I also read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets because I got the Hufflepuff edition. I showed it in a previous video as well. And so I wanted to read it just because, you know, I can't buy a book and not read it. But mainly the reason I have it is for my collection. I've read it like 6 or 7 times. It's the same thing. Really enjoyable, really liked it, so great. I also read Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and I really liked it. I had never read it, and so I really enjoyed the touches that, again, it just adds more content, and it's just really lovely, and it really enriches our knowledge of the wizarding world, so I really enjoyed that. Another book that I read for the Readathon and that I probably wouldn't have read otherwise was Aventuras de Nicolau. It's originally a French book, and it is basically this little boy, Nicholas, you know, his mom and his dad and his friends at school and like his adventures, but he's like a little boy, he's like 7 or 8, you know, but I really didn't like it. The stories themselves weren't that interesting, in my opinion, but maybe that's coming from me as an adult. But the other thing that I found that really annoyed me was the fact that the translation, and this could be just because of the translation, not necessarily because of the book itself. I really disliked the fact that it was so hard to read because the translation was just so archaic and so like complicated, and I felt like it kind of ruined the whole purpose of it being, you know, a kid's book. I was kind of disappointed with it. Next up, I read a book called Temeraire, which is also a series, and it is about Lawrence, who is a Navy commander, and in this universe, I guess, they're fighting Napoleon, the French and the English are fighting. The twist is that they have dragons. Lawrence finds the dragon egg, and it hatches, and it latches onto him. So then he has to give up everything that he was working on and, you know, his fiance and all that to go and become an aviator and to work with this dragon. Because if a dragon latches onto you, you have to like give up everything and go and like live with a dragon and do and like work with them every single day, and you won't have time for other things. At the end, there's a battle, and I think the series will go on. I think there's about 9 books in the series. And I liked it. I thought it was really enjoyable. I didn't feel like it was super good and super entertaining, but I did enjoy it, and I think I will continue on with the series and see where it goes. Then I read the book called Lyrebird, and she has a bunch of famous books, none of which I've read. And it's about this girl who has lived basically her whole life hidden, and this group of people finds her, and she has like this really beautiful ability, and they kind of exploit it unintentionally. So then it's all of the story of how that works out and all the trouble they get into, I guess. I thought it was kind of a typical romance novel kind of thing. It just, obviously you know that they're gonna end up together and that kind of thing. Spoiler alert if you were gonna read it. But it's pretty early on. You can figure out what's gonna happen. Not every single detail, but like you can sort of see where the story's going. But yeah, I really liked it. It was an enjoyable read, and the book itself was really beautiful, so I'm happy that I read it. Then I read another book called Strangeland. It's autobiographical, so it's this woman, Tracy Emin, who had a Turkish dad and an English mom, and she sort of grew up between Turkey and England, and it's sort of her life. I thought it would be more about like her childhood and her life, and it is, but it's kind of really messed up because she went through and she had a lot of bad things happen to her, you know. Then she becomes a person who is like heavily sexual, and in all of her descriptions, she's so descriptive about certain things that I just find really uncomfortable to read about, and that I didn't think were relevant to her like essence. The beginning of the book, I was really into it, and even though it was kind of dark and grim, I was interested in seeing how that affected her as a person, you know, and how what happened was her life. But the fact that she then she mentions like sexual situations a lot more than other situations, and I feel like in every story there had to be like a sexual context or a sexual aspect in there. That could be interesting, but it wasn't. It just felt like not good, and I didn't like it at all. So it made me really uncomfortable, and it just didn't feel interesting, and at the end I didn't feel like I knew her any better. I just felt like she was somebody that I probably wouldn't want to spend time with. I don't think that's the point of autobiographies. After that, I read a book called The Lover. And this is about a woman who is widowed fairly young. She's about 40 something. And she has 2 kids, one of which is a girl who's having troubles in her relationship, and the other one is a boy who is also having trouble in his relationship. They're in their early 20s. After her husband dies, she meets somebody who's a lot younger than her, and they really fall in love. And it's kind of the story of what everybody thinks about it, and how being so in love with this person kind of distracts her from other things that are going on in her kids' lives, which are really important and really hard to go through. So she sort of, you know, goes back and forth between thinking that she shouldn't be with this person, and obviously in the end she ends up with him. So no surprise there, but I did think that the topics were interesting, and I liked how it was written because it was sort of a typical chick lit / romance novel, but it wasn't like over the top, trying to be funny, trying to make you laugh and be relatable, you know? It was relatable because it was real, because that's probably what would happen if you were widowed at 40, you know, and you accidentally met somebody that you loved but was a lot younger than you. And I just thought it was a good book. Like it was very enjoyable to read. I felt like they weren't trying to be anything other than just real characters who, you know, had real thoughts and real emotions. I really enjoyed that book. Then I read To Kill a Kingdom, which is a retelling of The Little Mermaid. There's 2 aspects or 2 points of view. One, which is the boy, who is Prince Elian, I think he's called in the book. And so he is human, and he has a kingdom, and he doesn't really want to be king. He prefers to sort of have more of a pirate life. And then there's, I don't remember what her name was, Lyra, something like that, who is a siren. So it's sort of like our idea of mermaids, but in this book, mermaids are like this awful creature. They're sirens, and she is the princess of the sea. So her mom is the sea queen, and she is a ruthless person, or siren, and she's awful. And then it's sort of the story of how they meet and why they meet, because she meets him with the intention of killing him, and then she doesn't. So battles and voyages and adventures, and I thought it was really good, and I'm really happy I read it. So, okay, next book is called Walk the Blue Fields, and this is a series of short stories, and it's by an Irish author. And the stories, some were better than others, obviously, but overall the book was really good. Most of them were really interesting and were really, you know, they were touching and they were, yeah, enjoyable. So I really recommend this book if you like short stories. It was my first time reading sort of a short story book. I really enjoyed it. So the next book is The Art of Being Normal. I knew going in that it was about a boy who wanted to be a girl, who didn't feel like he was in the right body, and this other boy who is hiding a secret. It's very interesting to read from the perspective of somebody who is transgender or who hasn't yet gone through the transformation but already knows and identifies with the opposite gender. So that was really interesting. I don't have a lot of knowledge on it because I've not experienced it myself, obviously, and I've always been interested in just picking their brain and knowing what they're thinking and how they feel. And not because it's something that I don't really understand. Obviously, it is something I don't understand because I've not experienced it, but it's something that I'm really interested in understanding and that I'm curious about, you know, what goes through their minds. And this is something that I've talked about in videos before. I'm really interested in people's minds and how they think and who they are. This was a really good book. It was a little bit funny. It was very touching. And the characters were sort of built in a way that you were so attached to them and you really were rooting for them and you really wanted them to be okay. Okay, and the last book of August was The Lost Symbol by Dan Brown. This was just like every other Dan Brown book, you know, adventures. Somebody dies or is dying, or, you know, well, somebody does die, but spoiler alert. But yeah, it's basically Robert Langdon saves the day. I kind of like the predictability of Dan Brown books because even though I know what's gonna happen, I also really like being taken on that journey, and I really like how much he talks about religion and different points of view about religion, and how he talks about tons of different scientific positions and like science in general. Yeah, so that's all of the books that I read this month. Have you read any of them? And if so, what did you think? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave it a like and maybe, like I said, a comment and let me know your thoughts on it. And if you would like to, you can consider subscribing to my channel because that would mean so much to me and it would really help me. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!